Thank you, Rabbi Kleinbaum, and all of CBST for reaching out to me and asking me to speak tonight. For those who don't know me, as the rabbi said, I'm Narda. My wife, Shelli, and I, we are proud members of CBST with our two children, Malka and Noah Matan. We used to be Friday night regulars back on 29th Street before our kids got big. CBST is where I converted. It's where both of our children were named. It's where I had my adult bat mitzvah. It's where I mourned the death of my mother. CBST is also where I learned from Rabbi Yale Cohen that I have a unique Jewish voice. I'm using that voice now, even though I am sometimes seen by other Jews as inauthentic or not really Jewish because of my Black skin. So now in 2020, when the world seems finally ready to acknowledge that Black lives are not disposable or inferior, I'm challenging myself to interrupt, to disrupt, to not stay silent, and to stop prioritizing my white Jewish community's comfortableness. I want to share with you a story that highlights my complicity and why I can't stay silent anymore. So about 2 years ago, I was on the Upper West Side for, ironically, a conversations about race meeting with other parents from my child's school. It was winter. It was already dark. I had just arrived at a really nice doorman building right off of the park. And I was early. It was too early to go in, but it was not early enough to go to a coffee shop and sit. I was acutely aware that I was a Black person wrapped in a dark winter coat, just sort of hanging around out front of this Upper West Side building. I knew that I would be perceived as suspicious, as threatening, but before I could make a decision to go in or to walk around the block, the white doorman came out and he raised his voice at me to move on, just as two other parents walked up, seeing and hearing the entire exchange. I said, I'm with them, and the doorman promptly ignored me. He opened the door for all of us, and on the wait for the elevator and then the ride upstairs, none of us acknowledged what had just happened. Once inside, I forced myself to let it go. I was embarrassed that the other parents had seen the doorman yell at me. Now, of course, I wish that I had been outraged that the doorman had profiled me and raised his voice at me. Now, I wish that I had challenged the two parents who saw how I was treated but did not speak up. So that evening, the topics of conversation, it centered on how to diversify the school's curriculum, how to talk to our kids about race. That evening was also full of microaggressions. One parent said they don't see color. They were very proud of this, and they were teaching their kids not to see color too. They also did not identify as white because they were Jewish. Another parent thought that we should be careful not to talk about racial inequity too much because we might frighten our children. This same parent proudly shared that each of her nannies and housekeepers were women of color. At least two parents referenced their Black childhood friends as proof that they had no racial bias. And another parent offered their experience of anti-Semitism as proof that they were racially evolved. Now, I know hearing a list of these aggressions like this, I think it's really easy to say, how could somebody say that? Or I would never say that. Or I'm much more woke than those, Upper West Side Jews. And I think dismissing or discounting is a really easy excuse for us to truly not look at ourselves. So that night, I didn't interrupt any of it. I didn't interrupt any of the microaggressions during the meeting, and neither did any of my white allies. I did not name that being the only Black Jew in a room full of white presenting Jews and talking about race was scary. I was not surprised or shocked by anything that was said. Racism has been normalized for me, and I've had 50 years of systemic harm. I'm ashamed to admit that on that train ride home, I berated myself for taking it all so personally. So I have a lot to unlearn, and my white Jewish communities have a lot to learn. My prayer tonight, in this moment of a global pandemic that has highlighted just the devastating racial inequities, in this moment of activism and outrage and dismantling, hopefully, and holding America accountable, my prayer is that we demand accountability from ourselves. Self-interrogation, where we acknowledge our bias, where we acknowledge our racism, and where we commit to lifelong change. Thank you, and Shabbat Shalom.